Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is Billy Brandt. On this week's episode, we have a lot of headlines to talk about, including shuffling for UFC 189 in July. We're also going to talk about big Bellator news, both good and bad. We're also going to break down UFC Fight Night Berlin, which was on Fight Pass this past weekend. And we will also pick the main card fights for UFC Fight Night 70 from Hollywood, Florida, this Saturday on Fox Sports 1. Once again, as I said, I'm your host, Jim Graham. Alongside me is my co-host, Big Shot Billy Brandt. And how's it going, Billy?
Pretty good. Aside a few fight things getting ruined.
Yes, we had a lot of shuffling. Obviously, we're going to talk about the shuffling here from 189, and then the card this weekend saw, I believe, 2 fights officially get canceled, and I believe another 2 or 3 get changed in terms of opponent, and some of the fights got moved to another card. So this weekend's card was almost in jeopardy of being bad for the fans down there in Florida.
Yeah, it keeps getting worse and worse.
At least, I guess, the one this weekend, there's really nothing the UFC could do about it. That was visa issues. That's what the government and all that. That one's really hard to do a whole bunch about. You know, injuries are one thing, but when you start going visa issues, that's really something out of the UFC's control.
Yeah, there's not much you can do about it. It happens. It sucks, but you just got to move on from it.
All right, let's get to, I guess, the big news, and that is UFC 189. Let's start with the news they were able to salvage here first. John Hathaway, longtime UFC veteran out of England, he is hurt. He was supposed to be taking on fellow European Gunnar Nelson in the welterweight division. But Brandon Thatch, who was scheduled to fight John Howard on the card, he will be switching opponents. So he will now be taking on Gunnar Nelson. And John Howard will now be taking on Gunnar Nelson's training partner, Cathal Pendred. And that will also be in the welterweight division. So the UFC was able to kind of salvage those 2 bouts. And no offense to John Hathaway, I think he is, you know, even though he's been around for a while, I still think he's one of the young up-and-coming guys in the division. But the Brandon Thatch, Gunnar Nelson, I think leads to more excitement because both guys have great finishing abilities. Obviously, Nelson probably more so with his submissions. Yeah, obviously Brandon Thatch, I believe, has like 10 first-round knockouts. So the definitely contrasts the styles. And I think after, even though it was a loss, after Thatch's performance against Ben Henderson, I think a lot of people are anxious to see what he can do now that he seems to be healthy and not getting injured all the time.
Yeah, this is one of those rare times where something makes a fight better with a last-minute replacement. I mean, Gunnar's grappling and Brandon Thatch's stand-up coming off that loss, it's for sure going to be a great fight.
And then for Cathal Pendred, he's gotten wins here in the UFC, but they haven't been impressive. He hasn't looked really all that great since dropping down to 170. He seems really drawn out. And now he's taking on a guy in John Howard, a guy that's fought at 170, 185. He's a tough dude. He's big, strong, has a lot of power. And if Pendred can get by John Howard, I think that's a big step forward in his career.
You mean to tell me this isn't for a title shot? I mean, Cathal's 4-0. Let's give him that title shot.
Hey, Neil Magny's like 7-0 and hasn't got a title shot. So,
hey, I mean, who has been as impressive as Cathal?
I don't think he's been that impressive in the 4-0. But like I said, he gets by John Howard. He's on the step in the right direction, though. That's a name he can kind of look at, and people can look at and go, well, that's a pretty good win.
Yeah, this is the first fight for him that, I mean, every fight in the UFC is tough, but I mean, it's the first fight that's like a legit name for him, and it really people take him seriously and actually giving them big fights if he can get by John Howard.
So joining those fights here on the Brandon Thatch Gunnar Nelson, that's been moved up to the main card. That will join the likes of Dennis Bermudez and Jeremy Stevens and Thomas Almeida versus Brad Pickett for the non-title fights to be shown on the main card. And the Howard Pendred fight will be on the prelim card with some pretty good fights here. Billy, you got Alex Garcia against Mike Swick, once again making his like A3 return after injury in the UFC. Also, you have one of the young up-and-coming guys at Team Alpha Male, Cody Garbrandt, will take on Henry Browers. And then, boy, talk about guys that are aggressive, powerful, and just knockout artists at 170. Matt Brown against Tim Means for the main event of the prelim card.
Wow, that's crazy for that prelim card.
Yeah, that's a pretty good card right there. I'm excited. Tim Means the Dirty Bird. We got to
Yes.
see him in New Jersey. That guy's nasty.
Yeah, that's gonna be a great fight. I'm surprised that's actually on the prelims.
And then we're going to try to get him once again for an interview. I've sent in my request already. Our good friend, Mr. Sweet Chin Music himself, Luis Smolka, is taking on Neil Siri in the flyweight division. And then it rounds out with Yosendis Cedeno against Cody Pfister. It has a PM that might be silent. So anyways, we're going to try to get Luis back on the program. I've already sent my information out to try to get him back on the show, but looking forward to his fight as well. That'll be on the Fight Pass prelims, those last two fights. So sticking with 189, it came out through, let's see if it shows the original person who reported it. The UFC Netherlands Twitter and Facebook account somehow first reported the news of a injury with Jose Aldo. The reports are saying that it's a fractured rib. Now, as of now, the fight has not been canceled, rescheduled, and removed, or a fill-in replacement. As of right now, at noon Eastern here on Beyond the Cage, nothing has happened yet. Dana White has even tweeted out saying the words just relax. So far it's looking like the fight is going to continue, because I believe if he was out indefinitely, they would have already done something. This has been, it came out early in the day yesterday. So I feel like by now we probably would have heard something, or at least a tweet saying an announcement is going to happen. We haven't seen that yet. That doesn't mean it won't happen later this week, but I think they might have tried to do this quickly as possible. The UFC is pretty good, especially in this case. Now, if Jose Aldo's injured, I think Conor McGregor stays on this card no matter what. They put so much hype into this young man and so much hype into him fighting on this event. He has two of his teammates fighting. I'm assuming they're all going to fly out together. It's International Fight Week. Autographs and all the fans going to be in their Vegas this weekend. There's no way Conor McGregor does not fight on this card. I'm going to state that off the bat. Whether his opponent is Jose Aldo or not, I don't know. Now, I think that even if Aldo's only out for, his actual injury time, I guess, is kind of irrelevant when they would schedule the next fight anyway, which may not be till November, December anyway, just kind of looking at the grand scheme of things. So with all that hype and stuff, they could just make it an interim title anyway, to still have Conor fight for the title. And I think that's a very real possibility. Now, whether or not he's still the main event, it doesn't, I don't know if that really matters. Moving up Robbie and Rory, you can still promote Conor as much as you want. So how we were looking at it, Billy, and I think we had you on for the Manila show, with Frankie Edgar's win over Uriah Faber, I got to believe he's the first guy they call. Now, whether or not he takes it, I don't know, but he's got to be first on the list, and Chad Mendes has to be second. Those are the first two guys.
I hate to say it, but I do think that Aldo's not going to make it on this card. I think maybe if it didn't get leaked, he maybe could have tried to hide the injury and make it through. I don't know. I seen Frankie already posted a picture, like waiting for the phone ringing, so I think Frankie would for sure take it. I would love the matchup. I don't know. It probably wouldn't be the main event anymore, but still, it doesn't matter. It's the same difference. As an interim title, I don't know, because it's not like Aldo's been out forever. He's defended his title recently. I don't really know how that situation get cleared. He's out to like October or something area. Maybe just the winner fights them immediately. You have to have Conor still on this card. They put too much into it. All the people flying out just to see him.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's going to be so many people there, and like I said, his teammates are still fighting on the card. He'd probably, even if he wasn't fighting, he'd probably be there anyway.
Yeah.
With Gunnar and Cathal fighting. Heck, if even just one of them was fighting, he'd probably still be there. But yeah, I think that is the most likely scenario. Now, if for some reason those two didn't want it for whatever reason, then you start looking at guys like Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira, but I think they really want to keep those guys on that card in Saskatoon. That's why I really think it's really just Mendes and Edgar. And I think either one, let's see, Edgar hasn't fought, that was May, right? So a little more short notice for him, whereas Mendes fought back in early April and only fought for like 2 minutes. So not saying Frankie Edgar wouldn't be ready to go. I'm just saying Mendes is definitely ready to go.
Yeah, I think both of those two are 100% in weight, and it just if I don't see no freak accident of them two not taking it, but then yeah, Holloway'd probably be the best choice, but most likely Frankie or Mendez.
All right, let's get to this past weekend's non-UFC card, and of course, that's Bellator. Bellator had 138, their next real big event, you could say, as they had Kimbo Slice take on Ken Shamrock. And before we get to the fights, they had a pretty good showing on TV as the show, dubbed Unfinished Business, pulled in 2.1 million viewers during the main event, with an average of 1.6 for the event. And Spike said it was the most watched television program that night amongst the core demographic of males 18 to 49. Their last event, their big, I guess you could call it their tentpole event back in November, Bellator 131, drew an average of 1.8 million. So it seems as though these kind of real big events every couple of months so far seem to be doing good for Bellator. But to me, the trick is, can they get it trickled down to their lesser events and not just having people tune in for the big ones? I guess that's the bridge that Bellator would have to work on.
Yeah, I think it'll work too, because just looking at this card, if you watch that Pitbull fight, there's no way next time you see him on a card you're not going to want to watch that, right?
Oh yeah, I think if people didn't know who Patricio Pitbull was, I think they definitely found out on Friday night.
Yeah, I think that was the beauty of this card. So many people watch. Like I said, I hated it, the idea of Shamrock and Kimbo, but it works. And then everyone that's not knowing who they are, if they watch that fight, I'm tuned in every time I see that guy's name.
Looking at the fights, a lot of excitement. Started off with former lightweight champion Michael Chandler. I mean, I know it's only Derek Campos. I will say he is a solid competitor, but Michael Chandler looked like the Michael Chandler remember before losing like 3 fights in a row. He looked really good and just took care of business very quickly against Derek Campos, submitting him at the 217 marker. And then Daniel Strauss, very methodical. I mean, he landed a lot of good stand-up, did pressure a little bit with takedowns, but really just kind of picked Henry Corrales apart, and then eventually was able to lock in a guillotine choke at 347. And for Daniel Strauss, this was good because he needed a fight where not only, one, he could get a finish, because sometimes he doesn't always go for the finish, and two, a fight where he didn't allow mistakes to take place. He was able to go in there and finish the guy before he makes any sort of mistake. And I think that's good for Daniel Strauss, because he probably should have beat Patricio Pitbull in his last fight. He was definitely winning that fight and then went for a kind of a silly takedown. Pitbull capitalized and got a submission. So I'm hoping that fight's run back. I'm hoping that's the next fight here for their featherweight division. We'll get to Pitbull in just a second, but I think a Daniel Strauss Pitbull 2 is on the horizon.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's the right way to go. Chandler looked good. He went out there to get right back up in those contention. For those two, it was a good night.
Now, this was the only fight that was kind of boring. Bobby Lashley took on late replacement Dan Charles. He was originally supposed to take on James Thompson. Bobby Lashley does what he's pretty much done most organizations to guys, taking him down and kind of slapped him in the face a little bit, and eventually all those little slaps allowed John McCarthy to finally stop this thing at the 414 marker in the second round, and probably was one of the most boring knockouts you'll ever see in MMA.
Yeah, there was nothing too exciting. Bobby Lashley was just better all around, but he wasn't really like dominant and really doing like a ton of damage. But it was enough to say, all right, he shouldn't be in there with him. Let's stop the fight.
Now, before we get to the co-main event, I want to mention, I think they ended up showing 2 of the undercard fights, but one of them was Justin Lawrence, former Ultimate Fighter competitor, and I thought he looked really cool, calm, and collective, and I think was kind of picking and taking his shots, and then eventually towards the end there, he landed some nice big shots, including some elbows, and then was able to put Sean Wilson away just before the first round ended at the 456 marker. I think speaking of the featherweight division, I think he's a guy to look out for. And then on the other token, you also had Adam Sella, another guy that fought in the Ultimate Fighter guy. Bellator was hoping that could do some things for him. He did not look very good against relatively unknown Kyle Kurtz, as Kurtz was able to submit Adam Sella in the second round at the 4:13 marker. Both those ended up making the main card. But for Kurtz, a guy that was brought in pretty much to try to lose to the Ultimate Fighter guy, he had a very impressive performance. Then for Justin Lawrence, I think he looked as good as advertised, the former RFA featherweight champion.
Yeah, good for Kurtz. Looking back at that fight, Sella was dominating the whole fight. Like, if he didn't pull that armbar right there, he would have lost a good decision. So it was a good win for him. Justin Lawrence is everything we expected. We talked about it last week. Look out for him. His striking is so good.
Now, for the co-main event, already the aforementioned Patricio Pitbull took on Germany's Daniel Weichel. And I think for most of the first round, both guys were really tentative. They were not really throwing a lot. They were being conservative. I think they were really respecting both each other's striking ability, and obviously for Weichel, the power of Pitbull. And then kind of towards the end, after about the 30-second marker, Weichel was able to land a really nice flurry of strikes that sent Pitbull kind of up against the cage, looking a little woozy. And some fans, in all the excitement, maybe didn't hear the bell for the end of the first round, thought maybe it was stopped as a knockout. But upon kind of showing the replay when they came back for the second round, yes, the bell did ring then. John McCarthy stepped in. Pitbull was all right, comes back out for the second round. Weichel kind of continues that pressure that he had on there in the last 30 seconds of the first round. But then Pitbull, in classic Pitbull fashion, was able to come from maybe about to getting knocked out to landing the knockout himself, as he landed a flush left hook to the face of Daniel Weichel, sending him crashing to the canvas. And that was all she wrote there in the second round for Patricio Pitbull to maintain his featherweight title at the 32-second marker in round number 2. And once again, like we mentioned against Daniel Strauss, Pitbull goes from losing a fight to winning so quickly. And he's now had 3 fights in a row where he's just been able to go out there and get the W. And boy, he's looking like a guy that looking pretty unstoppable here as of late.
Yeah, I don't know how this dude keeps doing this. I mean, I was one of those fans that I jumped out of my seat. I didn't hear the bell. I thought it was over for sure. And then he comes out next round. Weichel did what he had to do. He kept the pressure, didn't let him recover. Got a little too careless and got caught with a mean left hook. I don't even know if it was careless or Pitbull was just that good. But I don't know what you got to do against this guy.
Yeah, like I said, Strauss had an opportunity to beat him, ends up getting submitted. Kern had another shot at him, and Kern just got dominated. So he's beaten all the top guys. Like I said, I like to see that Strauss fight run back. But if he beats Daniel Strauss a second time, whether he was losing and then somehow wins, he's a guy you start looking at. All right, not just is he the best guy in Bellator, you got to start thinking, how would he do against the best guys in the world? He's starting to look that good.
Yeah, I'd for sure want to see him up in that pound for pound list if he takes Strauss again.
All right, well, let's stick here with Bellator. Got some. We'll go with the bad news first. Kimbo and Shamrock. We got to talk about that. I guess that's good news too. So Kimbo and Shamrock fought in the main event. Unfortunately, as I predicted, they did not knock each other out, so I lost that bet. But the way the fight went down, one, glad it ended in the first round. We didn't have to see those two old guys try to go any longer than 5 minutes. Second, Ken Shamrock, I think, proved why he retired 4 years ago. Don't get me wrong. Kimbo gutted out that rear naked choke and all that, but I got to believe Ken Shamrock, who's not over 50 years old, finishes that hold. I just think he was just out of juice. He was squeezing as hard as he could, and Kimbo, I think, was just like, I'm gonna hold on, and if the referee stops it, he stops it, but I'm gonna hold on and just hope I get out of it. And that's kind of what happened. While coming up, Kimbo caught him with the right hand, and again, Shamrock's 50 years old. He can only take so much punishment. That was pretty much it there in the first round. Kimbo getting the victory. Some speculation has come out whether the fight was fixed and whatnot, and I don't think so. Is it really that much better of a story if Kimbo wins as opposed to Ken Shamrock? I don't really see the point of fixing a fight, so to speak. Both these guys were going to get paid pretty good money, so I don't really get that. And for Ken Shamrock, a guy that not his career was pretty much over when he first was going to fight Kimbo, but I think he really did want this fight. You know, even now at 51 years old, like I said, been retired for 4 years, hadn't fought. I think he did legitimately want this win. I don't think there's any way a guy who used to be that good would throw a fight. I just don't see it.
Yeah, that's the thing with this fight when people talk about a fix. I don't see any reason to do it. Like, Kimbo is the heavy favorite. Unless if Kimbo takes another big fight, then maybe I'd contemplate it, because now you're selling all that again, and maybe they knew Shamrock wasn't going to do it. I don't see and if it was a fix, that shot was real. Kimbo put him to sleep. Like, he threw everything into that. I think more of that choke. He never got it fully behind the head, and he's 51. How long can you squeeze onto that? And a fight 51, he's been through how many years of all these wars? His body's got to be beat up.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And to me, typically when you start taking fix, it's because the underdog wins. And if Shamrock's the underdog, that's typically when fixes take place, not when the favorite wins. It's not a fix if the favorite wins.
I think it was like a 4-1 or something around there. I know Kimbo's like, I forget what the exact was, but it was a good size favorite. Like, you'd have made better off if Shamrock finished the choke.
Right. That's, you know, if you're going to talk a fix, and it wasn't, but that you got to say something like, oh, Matt Serra beating GSP, that was a fix. Something like that. You can maybe try to make a case, but you can't make a case of a fix if the favorite wins. That's typically not why fixes take place. They take place to the underdog, so the company bets heavy on the underdog and then wins money.
If Kimbo's fighting for a heavyweight championship, maybe I'll think it was a fix.
I mean, that's kind of why, if any fans read comic books, that's why Daredevil's father died, because he was paid to take a dive because he was the favorite, but he didn't.
Exactly.
That's the whole point. That's why it's called a fix. All right. Let's get to, speaking of bad news here, Bellator, their former middleweight champion, Alexander Shlemenko, probably won't be around anymore, as the California State Athletic Commission handed down a 3-year suspension and a $10,000 fine for his fight against Melvin Manho for taking performance-enhancing drugs, officially the steroid oxydoryline and oxydoryline metabolites, as well as testosterone to epitestosterone in his urine sample. And I guess the one level of testosterone to epitestosterone level was 50-1, and I guess the limit for normal people is 4-1. So he was 10 times higher than the limit. So Shlemenko will probably not fight in the United States ever again, and probably will just reserve to fighting in Russia. But kind of a sad ending to Alexander Shlemenko. He was a guy that, with the exception of losing to Hector Lombard, you know, hadn't lost, was kind of their face of the franchise, so to speak, especially when Ben Askren was let go. And then all of a sudden, you know, take steroids despite having that flashy knockout against Manhoef. Kind of a sad ending to the career of Alexander Shlemenko here, at least for U.S. fans.
I mean, as much as it's a sad ending, I'm kind of happy for the sport, because when they take things this seriously and guys get put out for that long, it's one step closer to cleaning it up for good and actually making, like, all right, maybe if I mess around with this, now my whole career is done.
This is the second Bellator guy to get suspended by the California State Athletic Commission. Mike Richmond, a couple weeks ago, he got 2 years for his failed drug test. Now Shlemenko 3. And I got to admit, and this is now the second case where we've seen the California Athletic Commission not only throw down the hammer, but throw it down quickly. Yeah. And once again, I got to applaud them for their speediness in this matter, because we're still waiting on the Silva and Diaz penalties from January for Nevada. So I got to give major props to California for not only throwing down the hammer, but getting this stuff done. That's what people want. It's one thing to get punished or not punished, but at least let us know what's going on. There's no way, and to me, there's really no excuse for Nevada not being able to handle down their commission. This is what the whole body was set to do. Like, how much other crap do you got to get before you punish these guys? It's been 6 months now. It's ridiculous.
In a sport like this, you want to see Anderson fight again. This is kind of like an exception because it's him. if you get that suspension out as fast as possible, so we know where he's sitting at, if he has a chance to come back or anything like that.
Now, at least in the Diaz case, they did ask for a continuation. At least there's some, you can make some sense of that. But the Anderson Silva one, he's not asking for any sort of continuation. They're just delaying it for no reason. It really makes no sense.
Yeah, I don't know. At this point, I got to imagine there's something higher going on. Maybe Silva found a way out of this, because I heard there was like one test was positive, one wasn't. So there's like some dispute in that.
Well, either way, I just would like something to be said. So at least a meeting to take place. So, you know, like I said, something's got to get done here, because California, again, is showing them up. And it seems like that's the state now to have your big fights.
Yeah, I could agree with that. That's the way they take care of things.
All right, speaking of California, they're going to get another big event for Bellator in San Jose. It's going to take place September 19th, officially dubbed Bellator 141, airing on Spike TV. And first things that's going to happen is a one-night, four-man light heavyweight tournament, I think with the winner getting a shot at the title. Taking place here in this tournament will be former UFC fighter Phil Davis, former Strikeforce champion King Mo, former Bellator champion Emmanuel Newton, and also former title challenger for Bellator Linton Vassell. Those four will fight in this four-man, one-night tournament. The first round matchups will only be 2 rounds, and with that, that could open a case of a draw. But Coker says that Bellator and the California State Athletic Commission are exploring the possibility of using a 4th judge in that first round to avoid a draw and or a third round sudden death. Coker has tried a couple tournaments before. He had a women's tournament in Strikeforce, and also he tried the Strikeforce Heavyweight Grand Prix a couple years ago that didn't really go very well. In addition to this night for Bellator 141, we're going to have Tito Ortiz will be taking on Liam McGarry for the light heavyweight title for Bellator. And also they're going to throw some like kickboxing in one huge event here. And it's going to be Bellator, currently MMA fighter, but he also started out as a kickboxer, Paul Daly. He's going to take on former Glory champion, also Bellator MMA fighter, Joe Schilling. Is going to take place as well. They're calling it Bellator Dynamite, Bellator 141. And I got to say, this is a very cool concept. I like the tournament. I'm glad Scott Coker, again, he's not doing the format that Bellator has done before, but I like the fact he's throwing in tournaments, and will be throwing in tournaments like this every now and then, whether it's one night, multiple nights. However, I think tournaments are still pretty interesting. Ortiz against McGarry, you know, I could really care one way or the other, just because, you know, Tito's obviously not going to be the champion for very long, so that doesn't matter to me. But it is exciting to see, you know, kind of one of the old guard take on the new guard in that respect. And then, you know, Joe Schilling's a very exciting guy, so is Paul Daly. So it'd be cool to see him, I guess, in an MMA match. But, you know, both those guys pretty much only do kickbox anyway, so why not have them in a kickboxing match?
Yeah, I'll start with the Glory side. I've been really into it. I never started till recently, but when a couple of those kickboxers square off, it's like really exciting, and especially with those two guys, Joe Schilling being one of the best, same with Daly. I'm excited for that. And then on the tournament, I love this so much. Like, you're not going to beat the UFC heads up for talent. Doing stuff like this and being different is where you're going to take off, and where I'm going to watch that anytime. Just, you got to go through so much more fighting multiple fights in a night. And then for Tito, I'm assuming this is just to promote McGarry. If Tito pulls it off, I'd be amazed. I don't want to say too much doubting him or anything, but I think I read somewhere, I don't want to quote it, but Tito is offered like Frank Shamrock or a title fight, which seems so ridiculous. Like, those are your options.
Yeah, I think I read that too. So it's like you fight Liam McGarry to be the first man to become a Bellator and UFC champion, or you fight a 50-year-old guy, Frank Shamrock.
That makes no sense to me. Like, those are your options. It doesn't seem, but I mean, it's good for McGarry because people are going to watch, and then if he destroys you, now McGarry's a star in his own right.
Yeah, and I think it's not appealing because he knows Frank Shamrock is done. He hasn't fought in many years. Not only that, Frank Shamrock was never a big 205-pound guy. You know, he really wasn't cutting much weight to get down to 205 pounds. And when they fought way back in the day, you know, that was even towards the area where they almost didn't even have weight classes. So yeah. It's not that intriguing anymore. And even when it happened, I don't know if that many people were really clamoring for Tito to take on Frank Shamrock. I think Frank Shamrock's been so far put out of people's minds that I'll put it this way. At least Ken Shamrock has always had the appeal for two reasons. One, he was very dominant at the start of his career. And two, the pro wrestling thing. That has always made him really attractive. Now, Frank Shamrock, in his own right, probably should be in the UFC Hall of Fame with Ken. I think that's a very serious statement, and has had a very good career, but hasn't always had the same pop. He's always been Ken Shamrock's adopted brother. There's always that tag of Ken to it, and I think that for as much as he's done on his own, there's always people think when they hear Shamrock, they think of Ken, then they're like, oh, it's Frank. And I think now more so that Frank hasn't been in the spotlight, hasn't been announcing the Strikeforce fights and doing a lot of stuff with Strikeforce. He's really been put out of the public eye, and I don't know how much that really would do for Bellator. So I guess Tito did Bellator a favor by taking the fight against McGarry, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and for Tito, I mean, I would take the title shot every time. That's another notch to Tito's long career, rather than what's Frank Shamrock now add to it? Nothing.
Absolutely. So for the fans of San Jose, they're definitely getting a treat, and that's definitely one I think a lot of fans are going to be excited. I'm sure they're going to do another one of those big fan fests and stuff like they did this weekend, bring out a lot of stars. I know they had Royce Gracie and Fedor Emelianenko and Big John McCarthy and probably some others, if I'm not mistaken, sign autographs. So I'm sure we'll see more there at the Bellator Fan Fest they'll probably have in San Diego. So hopefully they can bring something like that back to Detroit. I know they had that event last year in Plymouth, but well, not just a big event, but just a event. And I'm hoping that'd be a cool thing to do because we got a lot of nice venues here that they can pull off the Fan Fest in terms of convention centers and halls and whatnot. Not to mention there's a Dave & Buster's not too far from CompuWare. I know they do a lot of stuff with Dave & Buster's, so I think that kind of works out with their sponsorships as well.
Side note, this is way off the page, but they've been getting all these other guys to fight. Do you think we'll see a Fedor or Royce Gracie step in there again?
Fedor more likely. Royce, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Royce, I don't think Royce is 60, but he's definitely in his 50s.
Yeah, he's up there. But Fedor, when I said it, I kind of knew, but I mean, Fedor would be more. I think he will. They've been getting everyone else too. I don't see if you give him, I don't know who, but it'd have to be one of those Kimbo Shamrock fights where it's
I like to see Fedor Tito.
Yeah.
That way Tito don't have to cut weight to 205.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do that. Frank Shamrock Fedor.
Might as
They're
well.
bringing back Frank Shamrock. All right, let's get to this weekend's. We'll get off of Bellator. This weekend's UFC fight. 4 fights were shown on the main card for UFC Fight Night Berlin. The second time the UFC's had a Fight Pass fight in Berlin. Main event, obviously, for the UFC women's strawweight title. But before we get to that, we had a fight in the lightweight division. Nick Hein against Lucas Szachewski is how you actually pronounce it. I think I was saying Sajewski, but I didn't know the pronunciation for Mr. Lucas. But anyways, looking at Germany's own Nick Hein here, Billy, looked really good. I thought he kind of continued what he did in his fight against James Vick, his last fight. And I think he started out kind of a little slow, but I think he amped it up as the fight went on. And that's something I really like to preach to guys, amping up as the fight goes into the later rounds. These are just thrown strikes here, but he threw 34 strikes in round 1, 44 in round 2, and 59 in round 3. And I think that's a really nice progression. They're getting more active as the fight went on. And for Szachewski here, he didn't really do much of anything. Overall, only landed 37 strikes, got outstruck 64-37. He also got taken down once. That was in the first round, and just never really looked comfortable and could never really figure out what Nick Hein was doing. And Nick Hein was being active enough and putting enough pressure to get the win here in Germany.
Yeah, I don't want to mess it up. Suski, he really looked like he was just staying in the fight the whole time. There wasn't much offense. I mean, he stayed in there, and it wasn't like he was getting dominated, but it was clear that Nick Hein was getting the better, and he had that edge on him the whole fight, and he pulled away farther each round, just like you said.
The next fight of the evening was in the welterweight welterweight division, Peter Sabata against late replacement Steve Kennedy. Another guy here, Billy, Steve Kennedy, not late replacement, yes, but a guy who hadn't fought in the UFC before too, and much like Shahevsky, just did not really show up and was not really offering Sabata much, as Sabata was pretty much able to do what he wanted, getting this fight to the ground, taking down Kennedy twice, and was able to do what he does best and work into submission, getting a rear naked choke at the 257 marker. And for Sabata, he takes on a guy short notice, a guy, even if it was the original opponent, a guy he was still supposed to beat, takes care of business. And I think for Sabata, now 2-1 since his re-return to the UFC, I like to see him take on, a little better competition. And for Mr. Kennedy, that's a tough matchup they're taking on. First of all, it's tough. I think Peter Sabata is a pretty tough guy. That's tough enough in itself, but take that short notice and fly the way to Australia, to Germany. That was going to be a real tall order for him to pull off the victory.
Yeah, everything from the walkout, Sabata he looked like he was operating at a way higher pace. Like, everything is movement. I think he landed a couple strong kicks to the body on the feet, got him to the ground, and really controlled it the whole fight. He looked like he was just operating a couple levels higher at a different pace.
The next matchup in the evening was the co-main event of the evening, and this was in the featherweight division as Kawajiri took on Dennis Siver. Looking at this fight, even though it went down to a unanimous decision, I actually thought this was a really close fight. Looking at the numbers, I thought that Dennis Siver had the first round. I thought he was landing more strikes of the two and also was being more aggressive, not to mention stopping the takedown there in the first round, as Kawajiri was only 1 of 6 on his takedowns, and Siver outstruck him 24-12. The second round, a little closer. Kawajiri was not only able to land a takedown, but stay on top a little bit, but he still got outstruck 27-19. I think I maybe was kind of leaning towards Kawajiri a little bit in the second round. Then the third round, really close. Siver really did outstrike Kawajiri when it was on the feet, 39-16. But Kawajiri landed 2 takedowns. And I think those 2 takedowns kind of swayed the judges there, Billy, to give him the fight on all 3 judges' scorecards, 29-28. And I think this, once again, a case, I think we talked about this in the Eddie Alvarez-Gilbert Melendez fight going back to 188. A guy got outstruck severely. In this case, Siver outstruck Kawajiri 90-47. But that pressure of the takedown and laying the takedown, even though Kawajiri was only 4 of 14, not great by any stretch of the imagination. I think that takedowns and being on top enough swayed the judges to give him 2 of 3 rounds, and he gets the victory over Siver there in his home country.
Yeah, for sure. I think Siver wins that first round. His defense holds up. I really like Kawajiri's striking. It's really different. He's always like lunging and throwing weird strikes, but I don't know how effective it was because I think Siver was handling them pretty good. And then, yeah, I would have liked to see Siver get this decision. Kawajiri, as much as he got the takedowns, he never did much with it. He got to full mount once. He got shucked off. He didn't do too much damage. But it's just like the Alvarez fight. It could have went either way.
Yeah, this was a fight where I think Kawajiri looked a little better than he did in his previous 2 fights because I thought his conditioning held up a lot better. And I think overall, just his performance was better. I didn't think he looked particularly good against Clay Guida. And really, even in his debut, he was taking on a guy that, I think that was Sean Soriano, obviously a guy, young in his career, was able to beat him. But I think he did look better. I don't know if he's working on his weight, nutrition, and all that, or weight, just did the weight cut better or whatever. But I thought just overall, he looked better. It wasn't the greatest performance, but better than I think he had in the past. And for Dennis Siver, it's probably his last hurrah. I mean, he had the big fight there against Conor, got dominated, now gets this fight, kind of in his home country, falls short. I don't think Kawajiri will end up being a title challenger, but I think the days of Dennis Siver being a threat in the featherweight division, coupled with him having that suspension a year or 2 ago for steroids, that might be his kind of last hurrah as a major threat here in this division.
Yeah, that really hurt Siver with that suspension. I don't see where he goes from here to make another run. It don't seem really – he might stick around and take a few more fights. I don't think he'll go anywhere. And Kawajiri, I'd like to see more of him still because he was interested to watch some of the strikes. Seaver's really kind of forced that down as he did. I think Siver will take fights and he'll end up there.
Looking at the main event of the evening for the women's strawweight title, Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Jessica Penne. And Penne, I guess I was wrong. I said would make it closer than people thought, and she didn't. So I'll admit I was wrong on that, but I did predict Joanna would win. I got that right. And also, if you are on the Beyond the Cage fantasy pick'em on the UFC.com website, I did predict Joanna third round knockout, so I was 100% correct on that. So mostly right on this one. And looking overall at this fight, I think it was two things, Billy, I saw for Joanna's dominance. One, obviously the hand speed and the combinations and the volume. But two, Jessica Penne did not follow our directions, Billy. What did we say she had to do to kind of be successful? Circle a lot, throw leg kicks, and try to create scrambles. And she did really not do any of that. For the most part, she was standing in front of Joanna and moving forwards and backwards. Not a lot of circling. And yeah, I think you got to do those things to try to be successful against her. And that didn't really happen in this matchup. And when she there weren't too many scramble opportunities, but she wasn't creating them. And then two, when she did try takedowns, they were much like Carla Esparza, kind of half-assed. And she had a couple like shoulder type takedowns, which were never going to work. And as much as I want to applaud Joanna, and I am, Penne did not do what was necessary to have a better chance to win. I will say that too.
Yeah, they got to set up their takedowns more. Even when she like clinched, it'd be like this clinch for a minute, and then she'd try and throw this takedown and get red like every time. I think the one time she had a good one was like right at the end of the first. She sort of got her. I mean, Joanna probably would have popped out anyway. And then as far as on the feet, I want to say, yeah, do your circling more. I don't know if anyone can touch Joanna on the feet. She's that good. Her Muay Thai is so good. Her speed is amazing. Her angles are crazy. Like, I don't know what you can do with her on the feet. You have to get her on the ground.
Right, but, we're talking about circling with leg kicks. Looking over at the fight metric numbers here, it shows strikes to the legs. Jessica Penne landed 5 strikes to the legs of Joanna for the whole fight. That at least need to be up. If you're not going to circle, you got to do that because you got to try to slow down her movement and footwork.
Yeah,
that's the best way to do it.
There's things you could do that would have made it closer and not catch a beating that bad. But, I mean, either way, Joanna, she's operating at a different level. I don't know who they're going to give her next. I don't think anyone in this division can beat her. Now,
I'm going to make a comparison here, and I think with the exception of the guy's wrestling prowess, I think how they approach the fight is very spot on, and that's TJ Dillashaw. The reason I say that is because her output is what makes the difference. It's not one-punch knockout power, much like TJ Dillashaw, but it's constant pressure. I mean, she landed 63, or not landed, but throw 63 strikes in round 1, 105 in round 2, and then 79 in round 3. The most Penne had in any round was the second round at 33. It's that constant output and pressure that is wearing these girls down. And you add in, like we said, not doing something to try to counteract that or slow it down with the circling and leg kicks, and you're going to move forward and stand in front of her. Well, she's just going to pick you apart because she has not only, like you said, the angles and speed, she has her conditioning to put that output on people. And that's what's wearing these girls down. And Penne just kind of broke to just getting, they were in Germany, so she was getting blitzkrieged, for lack of a better term. That's really what was happening there. And eventually, Joanna got the knockout there in the third round at the 4:22 marker. And in the process, it looks like she broke her thumb. She'll be out for a couple months, maybe need surgery. She kind of mentioned that she's fought 4 times in the last year, maybe take a couple months off anyway. So I don't think that's that big a deal. I don't think she was scheduled. I don't think she would be scheduled to fight probably till late this year anyway, not only just because of injury and taking time off, I think also just timed for the UFC to find someone to fight her. They need this time.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's good she's taking time off. Let a few girls get a few good wins or something, build up a decent name to actually fight her.
Now, I think in the short term, if Jessica Aguilar can beat Claudia Gadelha in August, I think that is a very real possibility that could be her next opponent. If Aguilar doesn't win, I don't know if the same will be said for Gadelha. I know that was a close split decision the two of them had in Phoenix back in December of last year, but I'm not sure how quickly they want those two to rematch. And a matchup, or at least one fighter I thought could really burst in to the title contender contention picture with a win was Paige Van Zandt, but instead the UFC has booked her a fight against Alex Chambers, who has not looked good so far in her 2 UFC fights. Yeah, she pulled out an armbar victory against Kylan Curran, but she was getting her butt whooped before that point, and also didn't really look all that great on the Ultimate Fighter. So for Paige, I think it's kind of a step backwards from fighting Felice. Very interesting booking here for the UFC.
You know, I think they want Paige to be the star, so I think they want to take the time and build her up correctly. She's still really young, and if you just throw in there with Joanna right now, it might get really bad, you know? So I think they're taking their time, giving her another fight or two.
Well, I definitely thought she was going to have another fight before getting a title shot. I just thought it was going to be someone a little higher ranked than Alex Chambers. That's all I was saying. Alex Chambers, like I said, basically is like 0-3 in the UFC, but she's, 1-2. So I don't know. I would have liked to seen Chambers maybe take on someone lower ranked, and really, honestly, I would have liked to see Paige, like we said, Rose Namajunas would have been a good option, or throwing that rematch against Tisha. I think there's a lot of girls that you could have had Paige against before you got to Alex Chambers.
Did they rebook Rose with someone, or what are they doing? Because I
have not heard anything. I honestly think Now, I've heard some inklings that Randa Marcos may be fighting here in August, and obviously Randa did fight Rose on the Ultimate Fighter, so possibly we may get a Randa-Rose matchup. I'm just speculating here. Randa is supposed to have a fight coming up in August. Whether it's against Rose, I have no idea, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought her versus Paige would have been a great fight, so I'm assuming they have something in mind for Rose.
All right, real quick, I just want to leave with this number. Speaking of Joanna's dominance, she outstruck Jessica Penne, and I just like reading these numbers for people. You want to talk about blitzkrieg and output, 162-28.
Yeah, good luck fighting her.
Like I said, that output and pressure, I think that's one of the keys to victory. And also, like I said, look at Nick Hein, throwing more strikes as the fight goes on, increasing your output as the fight goes on. I think that's a tough formula to deal with in any division, male or female.
Yeah, I do want to also say we talked about looking out for Amir Kahani, and he definitely showed up, got a nice first-round submission with that rear naked choke.
Yes, he did. So if you picked him or watched that fight, yeah, I think he's definitely a guy on the rise there, Billy, and I think a guy to look out for here for the future in the UFC's featherweight division.
Yes.
All right, let's get to this weekend's action. UFC Fight Night 70, Hollywood, Florida. 5 fights shown on the main card. This one got really shifted around and moved and canceled and all that. But still, overall, I think for 9 fights, Billy, not too shabby for a Fox Sports 1 card. And for the fans, if you're wondering, all 9 fights will be shown on Fox Sports 1 with a 4-fight prelim card, and then the 5-fight main card here. So you'll be able to see every fight on free TV. You don't have to worry about log on to Fight Pass or anything for these fights. The first fight of the evening will start in the featherweight division as Hakron Diaz will take on Levan Makashvili. Looking at Diaz, 2-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a win over Darren Elkins at the Fight Night Machida Dalloway card, and 10 of his 22 career victories are by decision. Looking at Makashvili, 1-0 in the UFC. He won his UFC debut fight back at UFC Manila against Mark Avita, and 4 of his 7 career victories are by decision. Now, I remember the Makashvili fight against Avita. He did a pretty good job with his takedowns, kind of keeping pressure up, but overall was not a very impressive performance. Diaz, I thought, looked really good in his last fight against Darren Elkins. He did a good job stuffing the takedown and really picking Darren Elkins apart. And obviously, Elkins is a guy much highly ranked than Makashvili's last opponent in Mark Avita. So I say if it stays standing, it's definitely Hakron Diaz. But even if Makashvili gets a takedown, Diaz is a pretty accomplished submission guy, and I'm not sure if that's a guy you really want to mess with on the ground. So for Makashvili, I think he's really got to try to bring his A game. He's got to hopefully up his conditioning, because Diaz is a guy that can definitely go 15 minutes and keep damage going for that whole length of time.
Yeah, I think it'll be similar to like the Elkins fight, where he should be able to keep it on the feet and pick Makashvili apart. And even like you said, if he gets him to the ground, well, now he's got trouble there too. So It should be a good fight.
The next one I also think will be pretty good. Will be a stand-up war as Steve Bossy will take on Thiago Santos. I had to make sure it was the right Santos. I don't want to say the wrong guy's first name. There's so many Santos here in the UFC. But looking at Steve Bossy making his UFC debut, he was originally supposed to fight for UFC 186. He was going to be Rampage Jackson replacement against Fabio Maldonado. Of course, Rampage ended up fighting on that card. Now fighting down here in Florida. In his career, he has 10 career victories, just one loss. 8 of those 10 are by knockout. We get Santos 2-2 so far in the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Andy Entz at UFC 183, and 6 of his 10 career victories are by knockout. And I believe Thiago Santos also has fought Uriah Hall in his career. So he's definitely a guy more apt to stand. And looking at Steve Bossy, definitely a guy, that's what he likes to do, get in close and just throw bombs. So I have a feeling that we may not only see a good knockout here, Billy, but we may even see fight of the night. I think this is going to be a very fun fight.
You calling that now, fight of the night? I hope so. But I was wondering why I remembered Steve Bossy's fight so fresh, but it was because the Rampage, which I forgot all about that. And yeah, this is one of those fights that's going to be hard to pick because it could probably go either way when they both stand there and trade.
Yeah, like I said, I've never actually seen Bossy fight, but just look at the numbers. You know, he's kind of a shorter guy for the middleweight division. You know, that's kind of what those guys like to do, get him close, throw bombs. Santos obviously a little bigger, a little taller. It'd be interesting to see whether he does try the ground, knowing that's really Bossy's only option, and whether or not Santos tries to throw a lot of leg kicks, because I think that's probably something Bossy doesn't do a whole lot of. So that would kind of be the X factor there in the fight, is if a Santos starts using leg strikes or decides to just take it to the ground to avoid the power of Bossy.
Yeah, it's hard not seeing him fight, but we'll see where this fight goes. Hopefully it ends up good.
The next fight, also in the middleweight division, is former Ultimate Fighter winner Eddie Gordon will take on Antonio Carlos Jr. Looking at Eddie Gordon, 1-2 since winning the Ultimate Fighter. Last fight, a loss to Chris Dempsey at Fox 15. 3 of his 7 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Carlos Jr., 1-1 so far in the UFC. The last fight, he had lost to Patrick Cummins back at the UFC Machida Dalloway card, and 3 of his 4 career victories are by submission. Now, we got to see Eddie Gordon fight in New Jersey, and his conditioning maybe kind of faltered out a little bit there towards the end. That could be one of the reasons why he lost the fight. And after that fight, I read an article on the UFC website that said he has taken his in-between fight nutrition more seriously. He said in between fights, his last couple of years, he had been blowing up to 220 pounds, maybe 230, which getting down to 185, that's almost 50 pounds.
Yeah, that's a huge.
And you factor that in, starting your camp, having to whittle down 50 pounds, that's a lot to start your weight cut process. It's okay to do it once or twice, and obviously he's been able to do it 7-3, been fairly successful, but to get to the next level, that's something you can't really do. And his teammate Chris Weidman said, not only is it affecting your conditioning, that's just going to take a toll on your body the more that you're going to have to cut weight, and that's going to allow you to fight less. And Chris Weidman's like, you can't get up that big. He's like, you can maybe do 210. He goes, but you can't do more than that. You know, you can't try to get that 30-pound limit. So Eddie Gordon has taken it upon himself to get a nutritionist and try to not blow up as big. And he did that for this fight. And I think we're going to see a new, revived, and refreshed Eddie Gordon for this fight, better conditioning. And I also think it's a bad matchup because Carlos Jr. got dominated by a wrestler in Patrick Cummins' last fight. Granted, that was 205 pounds, but still, Eddie Gordon is the guy that's more of a grappling-based fighter. You also, speaking of weight cut, now we're going to have to see Carlos Jr. cut down to 185. You know, how is that going to affect him, not having done that in the UFC and now taking on Eddie Gordon? So I think for this fight, maybe it's giving my pick away, but I think it's leaning towards Eddie Gordon. But Carlos Jr. is the guy that has a lot of submissions, could catch Gordon off his back. I think that's his best chance to get a victory. But I think we're going to see a new, improved Eddie Truck Gordon here in this fight.
Yeah, it's tough when you cut that much weight, that drains you, and it'll definitely show. And where I think Carlos Jr. has a shot here, like you said, he has to catch a submission off the back. I know he got dominated strongly against Cummins, but Cummins is a different type of beast. He's a lot bigger. He's probably one of the better wrestlers in MMA. And I think he'll have a shot to catch Eddie Gordon. Do I think it'll happen? It's a tough one. I don't know if I'd bet on it. It'll be interesting to see, though. I think this fight's more about how does Eddie Gordon show up. Is it better, like you said, or not?
The co-main event of the evening is in the welterweight division as Lorenz Larkin will take on Argentines Santiago Ponzinibbio. Looking at Larkin, 2-3 in the UFC. His last fight was his welterweight debut, dropping down from middleweights. He knocked out John Howard at the Fight Night in Boston. 9 of his 15 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Ponzinibbio, 2-1 since starting his career on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. His last fight, he defeated Sean Strickland at the Fight Night Bigfoot Mirror Card, and 11 of his 19 career victories are by knockout. 20 knockouts between these two gentlemen, Billy. I got to believe that's where this fight plays out and where this fight ends with the knockout. I think we're going to see a fun and exciting fight of both guys throwing, and not just throwing bombs. I think both these guys are pretty technical guys, especially Lorenz. Boy, why can't I say his name? Lorenz Larkin. And he's a guy I really want to look out for. This is a guy, I believe, that started his career in MMA and fought some tough dudes at 205 pounds. He's now all of a sudden at welterweight. And one thing I wanted to see, we didn't get to see against John Howard. Yes, he got the quick knockout, but how his conditioning is going to hold up, like I said, a guy that used to fight at 205 pounds. I like to see a fight kind of go a little deeper for him. And I think Ponzinibbio is going to be a tough guy to knock out that quickly. I think Larkin can get the job done, but I'm just saying I would be a little shocked if he knocked him out in under a minute. I think Ponzinibbio is a pretty tough guy, but for Ponzinibbio, not only just handling the striking, but if it gets in the clinch, how's he going to deal with the size of Larkin? Like I said, a guy that used to fight on 205, even 185 was pretty strong. So at 170, he's going to be one of the stronger guys in the division. So if it gets in close, how will that size and strength advantage, how will Ponzinibbio deal with that? That's to me kind of the X factors. If it gets in close, I got to believe Larkin has an edge, but maybe like I said, maybe the guy from Argentina has some things up his sleeve. But I think we're going to see a fun fight, kind of an under the radar co-main event, but I think either guy can kind of make a big push into fighting top talent in the welterweight division with a win here.
Yeah, I think this is a big fight for both of them to step up to the next, but I think honestly that this fight's going to play out pretty boring. I think, like you said, with all those knockouts, they're going to respect each other a lot, and it's going to be one of those fights where they kind of don't engage too much for maybe the first couple rounds. Maybe it picks up in the third.
The main event of the evening in the middleweight division, Yoel Romero against former UFC light heavyweight champion Lyoto Machida. Looking at Romero 5-0 since coming to the UFC. His last fight was a victory over Tim Kennedy at UFC 178, and 8 of his 9 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Machida, 14-6 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Luke Rockhold back at UFC on Fox 15, and 11 of his 22 career victories are by knockout. If it stays standing, I know Romero has that knockout power, but I got to believe Machida, he's good at not getting knocked out and moving and footwork and angles and all that. And I think if it stays on the feet, it also lends to Lyoto Machida. If this thing goes past the third round, I think it also lends to Lyoto Machida. I think he's the more conditioned athlete here at 185 pounds. But the X factor will be, one, if Romero takes down Lyoto Machida, which I think he can do. He was a silver medalist in wrestling. But what happens when it hits the ground? Luke Rockhold, a guy that's not really known for his wrestling, was able to take down Lyoto Machida several times and really rough him up bad. And I really wouldn't say Rockhold's really a one-shot knockout guy and was able to rough up Machida bad while leading to a submission victory. Romero's a guy that not only has great takedowns, but has a great power. And kind of seeing the way that Rockhold was able to manhandle Machida, it kind of is making me, a little worried that, because I am a fan of Machida, that Romero might be able to do the same exact thing. A guy that you would say has better wrestling credentials and grappling credentials than Luke Rockhold. So there are ways Machida can win, but if Romero's able to follow that blueprint and do what Luke Rockhold did, Romero may be walking away with a victory here in his new hometown of training there in Florida, living with ATT.
Yeah, this fight's hard for me being such a Machida fan, so it's going to be a little biased. But I mean, it's exactly right. I think if Romero wants to, he can pretty much take Machida down at will. He's one of the best wrestlers in MMA. Rockhold did it pretty handily. But I think sometimes he falls into this thing where he likes this sort of trade. If I remember the Kennedy fight correctly, he was doing a lot of trading. But Kennedy's not Machida. He might play it smart and just take it down because Machida on the feet is going to be a hard time for anyone. Even in the Rockhold fight, he was doing really well until the takedowns. I think it all depends on Romero. If Romero plays it smart, just takes Machida down, doesn't mess around, he'll get a decision here. If he stands and trades, that's where Machida has a lot of opportunity. And the longer it goes, the more for Machida, he can catch him coming in for a takedown or anything like that.
With that said, Billy, let's get to picks. UFC Fight Night 70 from Hollywood, Florida. First fight of the evening, featherweight division, Hakran Diaz against Levan Makashvili. Like I said, I was not very impressed with Makashvili in his UFC debut back in UFC Manila, so I'm going to go with the Brazilian and Hakran Diaz in this one.
Yeah, I agree. Hakran Diaz has showed better performances in UFC to me.
Steve Bossy against Thiago Santos in the middleweight division. I'm going to go with Thiago Santos. I think he will be the more well-rounded striker. I think Bossy can definitely pull the upset and get the knockout, but I think Santos has a little more tools, at least known tools to me, so I'm going to go with Santos in this one.
I always like my upsets. I think I got Steve Bossy here.
Eddie Truck Gordon against Antonio Carlos Jr. Like I said, I think Eddie Truck Gordon does have a future, and I think that using the nutritionist and not getting his weight too high in between fights, I think will pay dividends for this fight. And I think also he just wants to get the taste of that loss against Chris Dempsey out of the way. So give me the Ultimate Fighter winner, Eddie Truck Gordon, on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to take his word that he took it more serious and comes in more conditioned and not at too high of a cut. So Eddie Gordon.
Co-main event, Lorenz Larkin against Santiago Ponzinibbio. I think Larkin really impressed me in his win against Howard, and I think is going to be a threat here in welterweight, and I think will be a little too much for Ponzinibbio. So give me the former Strikeforce fighter there in Larkin.
Yeah, I agree. I think Larkin will be a little bit too much for him. He'll be a little too big.
Yoel Romero against Lyoto Machida for the main event of the evening. Machida definitely has a chance for victory, but I think Romero, despite kind of a little bit of a layoff here, fighting pretty much at home, just down the road from American Top Team in Florida, I think he's going to continue his role and maybe get a title shot in the process. So give me the man from Cuba to win this one.
I can't do it. I think in the third round, Machida catches him with a knee coming in for a knockout.
All right. Any final thoughts before we end the show here this week, Billy?
Yeah, Machida still has it in him. That's all I'm going to say, and that's all I'm going to hope.
All right. He is Billy Brandt. You can follow him on Twitter at WBrandt21. I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. Want to say thanks to our friends at MMAforlife.ca, and especially the guy who runs the site, the founder of the site, Ryan Pickup. He just celebrated a birthday. I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago. So happy birthday, Ryan, and thanks for the continued support here at Beyond the Cage and running your great website there, MMAforlife.ca. Of course, our friends Chuck Grace there at MMAinsider.net and Sean Smith. We also got our good friend AJ Hiller, MMASignaturesUSA.com, and we kind of mentioned it last week, Billy. He's going to run that big MMA Classic Expo with autographs, vendors, and booths, and all that fun. 2 days, October 3rd and 4th, Syracuse, New York. He actually created a Facebook page for it, the MMA Classic presented by MMA Signatures. Find it on Facebook. He's going to be announcing the first wave of fighters and MMA celebrities there coming up this week, and also show and also hotel information coming up. So if you haven't checked it already, you'll see that there. So that's definitely something to look out for here in the next couple of months. And of course, in the meantime, if you're looking for MMA authentic gear, MMASignaturesUSA.com. So for Billy Brandt, I am your host, Jim Graham, and thank you for listening to another edition of the Beyond the Cage podcast.